Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those on the West Coast and Central Time Zone. Those following from Israel and Europe, we want to wish you a good evening. Today, we have a very unique guest, really one of Israel's top journalists, and you're going to get a chance to learn and to see the challenges of what it's like covering this war. But really, one of the most thoughtful journalists that you'll ever meet. And we want to welcome Amichai. Amichai, many of you are familiar with the fact that he is a journalist on Kan 11, but I'm going to let him tell his background, his story. And Amichai is going to start out today's briefing discussing the situation with the hostages, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to ask him a number of various issues. At this point in time, we want to hand it over to our very special guest.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Amichai Stein. I'm a diplomatic correspondent at Kan 11 for the last 6 years. And a bit to explain, a diplomatic correspondent in Israel is a bit different than a diplomatic correspondent, I think, in the US, because here the diplomatic correspondent is covering the Prime Minister office. So you cover also economic stories sometimes. You cover politics, of course. Of course, you cover the diplomatic world and the international meeting and the international arena and Israel relations and the Abraham Accords, but you also cover all what's going through the Prime Minister's office and a lot of politics, because again, in Israel, the ministers are politicians. So this is a bit different from the US role of a diplomatic correspondent. I've been doing it 6 years. Of course, the last year, since October 7th, was a hectic year. Also, I think the mentality we had as journalists to go through while covering, stories, trying to be behind the camera, but some of these stories, sometimes they touched you because the person was an intriguing person or the story was just horrible to hear, and you wanted to give a person a hug during broadcast. And sometimes, I have friends, people I know that died during the war, during October 7th. I have a colleague from work who was murdered in the Novapest festival on October 7th. So it was a very emotional year, other than really working as a journalist, the hard year to cover and bring the best story you can. But it was also a very, very, very emotional year as a journalist, because again, people you knew were in the battlefield. Some of them were injured. I have a colleague that was injured in Lebanon from work, a reporter who covers Jerusalem. He was injured in Lebanon. So really, this was the last year for all of us. And I think we need to focus today, after we, let's say, ended the Lebanon saga. Hopefully it ended with this ceasefire, about what's going on with the hostage deal, because this is, I think, the main story, the main issue which is left for Israel to achieve as a victory at the end, a return of the hostages. And we're in a point, let's say, when you ask, where is Hamas exactly in this point? So Hamas is in a very difficult situation right now, because you had Hezbollah going out of the game, throwing Hamas out of the rooftop, saying, we are making a difference. There's no Lebanon and Gaza, there's just Lebanon. So up until now, Hamas and Gaza hope that there will be a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah. Didn't happen. They waited for the Iranian response, which the Iranians at this point back down. So also this is not, at least the assumption, not going to happen, some kind of Iranian response, which will cause a wider war in the region. So Hamas is left alone. Okay, they have the Houthis, they have some militias that maybe are firing once in a while, but Hamas is left alone. And Hamas' big goal of really an all full-scale war in the region, it has not been achieved at the end, we must say. So Hamas is left alone. And then the question comes to a point that you're asking, is Hamas going for a hostage deal now? Is it looking for its own end game, which it can say, I was victorious, maybe some terrorist leaders will be expelled from Gaza? That's the question have been asking ourselves, let's say in the last week and a half since the Lebanese ceasefire. And at least from one point, there's a positive sign coming out of Gaza, and this is the willingness of Hamas to go back and at least talk with the mediators. So the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Turks, or the people who are speaking with the Hamas terrorist. But up until let's say 2 weeks ago maybe, Hamas didn't signal it's rushing for a ceasefire or a hostage deal, or even willing to talk about a hostage deal. And now you've got Hamas officials in Cairo in the last few days, in the last week, going there and at least signaling that it is willing to talk. And this is a point that Israeli officials are telling you, okay, when we're looking at the chances to reach a ceasefire deal, this is a very positive sign that Hamas is even willing to talk about it, because it knows exactly what Israel's red lines are, at least Netanyahu's red lines, or the Israeli government or coalition red lines. And if Hamas is willing to go back to the negotiating table, meaning they're crunched after the Lebanese ceasefire and they want to talk about a ceasefire. Now, does it mean that at the end they will crunch and bail out of their demands that even the US call them excessive? We don't know at this point. But the signal is that Hamas is willing to go back and talk and at least initiate some kind of hostage deal talks. Now, we back then in May or June, the main scenario was a two-phase ceasefire deal, which in the first phase, the humanitarian hostages will be released, and in the second stage, the Israeli soldiers will be released. Let's say the truth, after a year in captivity of Hamas, all of the cases are humanitarian cases. That's what Israel is saying. So Israel is really looking right now for this maybe one deal or one stage deal. And then, or another option is doing some small deals, meaning Hamas will release specific number of hostages, a small number of hostages, and in return there will be a specific time of a ceasefire, not the end of the war, not a full Israeli withdrawal. And again, right now, Israeli officials are still saying, we are not going to agree for the end of the war. But again, when Hezbollah is out of the equation, and Iran, let's say the truth, is right now out of the equation, maybe, even Israel's red line can curve a bit if Hamas red lines can curve a bit, because we are really seeing the Israeli government all in when it comes to the hostage deal right now. Even in statements, we saw Omer Neutra, the announcement by the IDF that he has died, that he was killed and murdered already on October 7th this week. And you saw conversations with his family. You saw another Israel-American citizen, Idan Alexander. Hamas published a video of him to pressure the administration, to pressure the next administration to go for a hostage deal. And again, these signs, for example, this video is a sign that they want a deal, that they think that they can pressure a bit with these video, maybe on the US government. Maybe it can achieve something, and Israel can curve a bit, Hamas can change a bit its demands, and we can achieve the hostage deal. But to say the truth, we are in the point that we don't know where we're going right now with the hostage deal. Again, the main sign is that Hamas is willing to talk, or they bowing out from their original demands, which even the US, like I said that prevented this hostage deal. This is, I think, a question we will maybe get the answer in the next few days.
Would you share with us, I'm making an assumption that over the course of the last 14, 15 months, you've had conversations with families of hostages, you've had conversations with negotiators. Can you give us a little bit of the human side of the deal? What it's like for the families. And the reason I'm asking that question, on these briefings we've had twice Rabbi Doron Perez, we've had Ruby Chain, and they give us a little bit of an insight into what it's like as a parent. We've had Andrei Kozlov, we've had others, speak to us, Noah Argamani, to give us just a little inkling of an insight of what it was like for them going through that. If it's possible for you to share with us your perspective.
So I think at the end, we're in a situation that, again, I don't want to imagine something like this, but if a relative of a person has been abducted or is being a hostage, again, he will say or do everything he can to bring him back. Okay, and that's why I think we're seeing sometimes this harsh conversation between the Israeli government and Israeli officials and hostage families, because the question, what can Israel give up in a hostage deal? It's not only politics, and I'll put the politics aside. The main question is if Israel is saying, okay, we can do it for several weeks, this halt of fire, this ceasefire, and then the main question is, if the hostage deal doesn't go further than that, if Hamas does tricks during this deal, can we go back and fight? Can we at least continue the war? And this was the main debate that you had, I think, between Israeli officials and their hostage families during this awful year. At the end, it's very hard because Hamas is trying to paint a pink picture of the statue of the hostage deal talks. Now, it's a murderous group, it's a terrorist group, the families don't believe it, but still Hamas is saying, hey, if Israel will do only ABC, everything's going to be good, and we'll release everyone. The story is not that simple, unfortunately, and you see even the US officials are backing this claim that at the end, Hamas has new and excessive demands, at least he had 2 months ago, that made it harder to go through the hostage deal. Now, when you talk with the senior officials holding these negotiations, there's a division. Some of them are saying, listen, the hostage deal is the number one priority. Okay, we need to go and get back the hostages, and Israel needs to take chances to bring them back. Some of them, on the other hand, think the hostages are very important. We cannot forget them. But the question is, how much of a chance can Israel take in such a hostage deal talks with Hamas? And that's the main division when you talk with the people. Again, both of them think that the hostage return is one of the most important thing, the most important thing that can be. But the question is, how much can you take a chance in this kind of hostage deal after you had such a long war? At the end, you don't want to go back. Some of them claim we don't want to go back to square one, meaning October 6th. So again, everyone wants them back. But this is, I think, the two views when you're hearing the people who are involved in these negotiations.
Can you share with us, who ultimately represents Hamas in Gaza? Meaning, right now you have leadership that's gone from Qatar to Turkey, and they supposedly are negotiating, but they're not on the ground in Gaza. There's really no command structure in Gaza. So who's representing Hamas?
So that's a very good question, and Israeli officials have asked themselves this question a very long time. I know even the Qataris, back then when Hamas leadership was in Qatar, tried to ask the question, the Hamas people in Qatar. So the person who is right now the main contact person is Khalil Chaya. He was the deputy of Sinwar. So basically, he's connected to Gaza. He's not one of these rich Hamas terrorists who sat in Qatar and forgot for years what was going on the ground in Gaza. Khalil Chaya is Sinwar's deputy. He sat in Qatar. Qatar. Now he's going and popping in Cairo, but we don't know exactly. Sometimes he's in Turkey, sometimes he's in Cairo after Qatar told him to leave, but he's the main person. But it's a very good question. Can he deliver a hostage deal? Because I hear a lot of Israeli officials saying the question is, can you find a replacement for Sinwar who is less Sinwar than Sinwar? Meaning, can you find a Hamas terrorist leader who let's say, has the ability to release at least some hostages? I'm not saying all, but some hostages that can curve and bail out from demands of Sinwar, because you know how it can be. It can end his life at the end. So that's the big question right now. Israel, by the way, tried another way, at least in public statements, offering $5 million and a safe passage to whoever bring hostages. Up until now, we haven't seen something like this happening. So that shows you how much Hamas control over Gaza is very, very strong, or at least how much the people who are holding the hostages are very Hamas or loyal to Hamas until now. And the second thing is like you said, it casts a big doubt. How much does this conversation in Cairo have any base or any ground inside Gaza? This is another very good question, but we haven't, the truth is, we haven't reached this point up until now in the last few months, because the Hamas leadership outside of Gaza didn't agree to bail out of these huge demands. So until first you need to get to the point that the Hamas leadership outside can bail out maybe, or can change a bit their position, and then let's go back inside Gaza and ask, can things move over there? Because like I said, the story is, and that was Israeli and US officials, Qatar officials told me, that at the end, the Hamas leadership outside didn't show demands which were less dramatic than the Hamas inside Gaza.
Next question is, and it's a little bit of a different area. From what you're hearing and perceiving, who's in control on the ground in Gaza? And the question, if I could elaborate, you've got a situation where it seems that Hamas is still looting, controlling large percentages of the food, of medical aid, of other humanitarian aid that's being brought in by Israel into Gaza. Somehow they steal it, they control it, etc. Are they in control on the ground, or does it all depend on what geographic region of Gaza we're talking about?
So first of all, one of the main leaders right now on the ground is Sinwar's brother. But I think, we have spoken in the last year about Israel going after Hamas military targets, military terrorists. The army less went after the civilian structure of Hamas. And so you need to remember that at the end, all the mechanism of distributing food, even before October 7th, was held by Hamas. The mayors, the local leaders, the local civilian leaders were Hamas people. So Israel, less went after these people. And at the end, this structure stayed. And that's why right now they are in control of the civilian part of Gaza, of the distribution of food at the end. That's the main reason. Israel hasn't managed to build an alternative to distribute food. And because Hamas, and by the way, I heard this criticism that Israel isn't doing something on the civilian issue. I think already in the first or second month after the war. So where the civilian structure of Hamas stays, again, for example, you've got a mayor of a refugee camp or a head of refugee camp, and the people are still over there alive. They control the distributing of food at the end. It doesn't mean if the Hamas leadership of Sinwar or Ania is dead at the end, that these people are going out. Still, there's a regular mechanism on the ground that is still working. So maybe they're not active terrorist fighters who are fighting IDF soldiers. but do they control the civilian food? Yes, basically. So that's how Hamas is still in control of what's going on right now in the ground.
Would you like to share your perspective on the fragile situation in the north in Lebanon?
I think, again, things can change instantly. But I think at this point, Israel wants the ceasefire to go ahead because Israel's strategic goals has been reached. Israel, what it wanted to do in Lebanon, what it wanted to do against Hezbollah, had already been reached about even, let's say, the truth is 1 month ago. So the goals have been reached. So yeah, you can strike more, you can take down, but as Israel wants a huge offensive, ground offensive, up until the Litani or northern than that, to take every rocket launcher and every weapon, no, it's not the same story. And Israel knows that such an aggressive attack can damage the Lebanese government. So Israel right now, the strategic goal has been reached. So Israel wants the ceasefire. Okay, it wants the ceasefire. But Israel is setting up a red line that if Hezbollah goes back to specific areas or launches rockets towards Israel, the Israel response will be much more different than what it has been up until now, and up until October 6th. But again, Israel wants this ceasefire. The Lebanese wants this ceasefire. And let's say the truth, even Hezbollah needs this ceasefire at the end. The Iranian wants the ceasefire. So everyone wants the ceasefire. But after saying this, back then we said, oh, Israel doesn't want a war with Lebanon. Hezbollah doesn't want a full-scale war. Iran doesn't want, and the Lebanese government doesn't want a full-scale war. And then at the end, that's what happened in the end. So I'm saying it's a very delicate situation because Israel wants these 60 days to pass. It wants a ceasefire to hold. And the question is, for example, how fast will the Lebanese army go to the south, and then Israeli forces can go back? The Americans want already on day 50 of the ceasefire, out of 60 days of trial, they want already Israel out so they can go to phase 2. But again, it's very, very delicate, this story, because you've got in Israel the heads of the communities in the north saying, we are not going back. You need to prove us, okay? You need to prove us that you won't allow Hezbollah to become what it has become on October 7th. And that's why Israel is doing what it needs to do. And that's why Israel is striking targets when it sees something which is not according to the ceasefire. Again, we're in a very delicate situation. I think all sides want it to hold. All sides wants this 60 days to pass, but things can happen. So we can't predict. It's very hard to predict if there's one incident too much that will cause this ceasefire to collapse. I know, by the way, from US officials, they think it won't collapse, but who knows?
I mean, what from our vantage point, looking at this, the fact that there's a zero tolerance when Hezbollah, who you can't trust, they're natural liars, and they've proven themselves to be liars over the last 17 years. When they do something that Israel responds immediately, it's a strong statement to the Hezbollah that it's not the same rules as it was before October 7th.
No, it's a very strong signal, and in these kinds of situations and these kinds of deals, if you don't say and you don't show what you're going to do in the next days, if you don't do it on day 1, it's very hard to go back on day 30 or day 50 or day 40 and then say, oh, now we're starting to do it. It's very hard. So that's why Israel said we're going to do it from day 1. Again, the assumption is the ceasefire will hold because all sides want it to hold. But it's a very good question. Again, there be some incident which will be too much, and then maybe Israel will have to go much more harder, and then the rocket firing will be much more intense. We don't know that.
This is a hard question to answer, so feel free to pass. From your conversations with leadership in the North, the 60, 70,000 Jews who have become refugees in their own country. We could have never imagined that the term Judenrein would apply to Israel, to the homeland of the Jews. But there's not a lot of comfort. There's not a lot of confidence that they can return or that their communities can return. What do you see happening there? If you could project into the future 2-3 months from now, do you think eventually there's a return? Because, I mean, why am I asking that question? We've seen that along the Gaza Strip, whether it's north of Gaza, whether it's to the east of Gaza, for the most part, with the exception of those communities that were totally destroyed, like Be'eri and Kfar Aza, the inhabitants, the Jews of Otef Gaza have returned. And there's a great desire of many others to move into these communities, to rebuild, and it would become a revival zone. There's a real sense there of optimism despite the tragedy. You don't have that sense of optimism in terms of people returning to the northern communities. So if you could comment or your perspective on that.
I think, first of all, the story is very different because in Otef Aza, the people were ordered to leave Gaza, leave the area, after these tragic events on October 7th, the massacre themselves. So I think the people who go there say we want to, the idea of hope, the idea of rebuilding is much more maybe intense in these kind of people than people who they told them, guys, you need to flee away because maybe Hezbollah is coming. Okay? And then they saw day after day, their community is being destroyed. And also now they feel Israel has not given them the enough security parameters which they hope to have. For example, this area which Israel would have said, no one is going back. But saying this, you've got, at this point, the people's, first of all, there are communities in the north who are under complete destruction. Okay, the villages, the Moshavim, Yeshuvim, seem near the border, or some of them 50% destroyed, even more. Roads are destroyed because of tanks went over them. So first of all, you need to rebuild them physically. Okay, again, in the south, in the Otef Aza, in Sderot, you had a lot of places who weren't hit at the end, were evacuated, but they stayed as functioning places. They weren't hit. In the north, every place that was evacuated at the end is partially destroyed right now. So you need, first of all, a huge government project to fix what's going on there. The second thing is the feeling that Hezbollah terrorists can still go towards the border because civilians are able to return in Lebanon again to the villages near the fence. And we know these civilians are a lot of times Hezbollah people. So that's another thing they feel as safe. I think the question, when will people go back, and if people will go back, is based, first of all, that you have some people that were evacuated from the north, went into the Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, places when you have great medical services, hospitals, you can find everything. The prices are less cheaper. So people that went over there and already have houses there or renting house, their kids, remember, the second year, they're already in the education system in these areas, okay? It's a very hard question to answer. Will these people who manage to settle in these places will say, let's go back to the north, which we know it's much more difficult when it comes to medical services, other issues, jobs, things like that. This is the first group. The second group is the group that is right now in the hotels, which is getting funded by the government in one way or another to stay in the hotels. And the second thing is a group that is maybe rented a house but couldn't have managed to find a job, a good place to live in. So this is a situation. The question is, if will the government stop, for example, paying for the hotels and tell them only person who goes back will get, again, extensive things and we'll start building. But again, I think the basic question before we ask ourselves, what will happen in 2-3 months, is the question, will you be able to rebuild the oldest civilian structure for the people who live there? Okay? And this is a very big question. Will you be able to find the doctors and the nurses in the medical clinics, the teachers in schools? So you have, first of all, to close all of these things to start asking yourself how many, let's say, regular people are going back to these places. And it's very hard to answer this right now.
Have you heard anything? I mean, is there a department of the government that's actually functional, that's working on this strategically, that's fixing the roads, that's setting up infrastructure, that is facilitating people's return back, or you haven't heard anything?
So when the heads of the communities came to the prime minister on the day of the ceasefire, Netanyahu told them that he doesn't know when they can go back. That's the truth. He told them, we don't know yet. We need to see how the ceasefire is going, and then we will decide. There's Ze'ev Elkin right now is a minister who is in charge of rebuilding the north and the south. But this take time. For example, I saw a prediction about Be'eri. Okay, I haven't seen yet a prediction about the northern villages. That in Be'eri, for example, they will be able to go not before. I think Be'eri and Nir Oz, they won't be able to return before 2026. Okay, because a lot of things are ruined there. So this is right now the situation we are at. Again, it's the question of how fast will things go and work, and how much fast the budget will be approved and things like that. I'm sorry to answer this question like this. It's Israel. It's very hard to predict.
It's very sad.
That's the answer. And even the head of the communities don't know the answers.
You just don't have an infrastructure in the government that is capable of doing this.
So you do have Ze'ev Elkin was appointed of the head of the Tkuma body, which is supposed to rebuild the north. But again, you need the money, you need the people, you need construction workers, okay? Which is very hard right now to find in Israel. For example, since Palestinian workers are not allowed to go and work in construction inside Israel. So in the last year, a lot of workers from China, India, other places were brought, but it shows you how hard, for example, the basic things of a construction worker is a very hard thing to find these days. And of course, it will have implication of how fast these communities will return.
Amichai Stein, I want to thank you. You've been very, very open. You've shared with us certain insights. We have a lot to be optimistic about. On the other hand, we have a lot of trepidation, a lot of challenges. You want to share with us some last thoughts? Looking forward, how you see things. Any last thoughts you want to share with us?
I think a lot of when maybe looking from the outside, or even sometimes living here, there's a lot of pessimism about the future. Okay, a lot of the events in the last few years was dark, but I think when you meet the people as people, a lot of the warriors, a lot of the fighters, a lot of military personnel, these young 20-year-olds and 40, 45-year-olds who have kids at home and went to reserve. And when you meet these people in the surrounding areas who assist in the civilian issue, it fulfills you. That even things sometimes look very dark. And I'm not talking about the Israeli strategic place in the Middle East. Yes, we afterwards we did to Iran and what Israel struck Hezbollah and killing of Nasrallah, and even inside Gaza, you have a good victory about Hamas. But I mean, here inside, when you meet the people, you say they're very, very, very good people here on the ground. People who went to the army, to reserve, to help. People willing to go and help, to do things without money, and this fulfills you in a completely different way.
Thank you for sharing that, Amichai. Really, thank you very much. And
Thank you
for
very much.
taking time out of your schedule to speak to us, because it's interesting, over the course of these briefings that we do each and every week, to hear from a journalist, is a unique perspective, and that's a perspective we haven't had the chance to hear from. And we're very grateful to you. To those who are participating on the briefing, those who are seeing this, whether it's on JBN, whether you're seeing this on YouTube, or whether you're watching the briefing live, it is towards the end of the year. We have a huge amount of commitments to fulfill to both the Army and the Ministry of Defense. Anyone who would like to participate, we have a program now where we're adopting therapy dogs, not only for PTSD soldiers suffering from PTSD, but for families, bereaved families. If anyone would have an interest in that, please feel free to reach out to me, steve.weil@fidf.org, steve.weil@fidf.org. Many of you have responded to the briefings in terms of the university scholarships. We still have about 80 soldiers, all of them veterans of this war, either come from poverty or a lower middle class family. It's $5,000 a year for 4 years to fund the Impact Scholarship. We are looking for still about 80 more soldiers. Anyone who would have an interest, please feel to reach out. And the commitments we've made for PTSD, both the early detection, the therapies, the whole network of therapy centers that are being administered by SHIPA. We have quite a few commitments on that. We've committed, as of today, $115 million. And I want to share with you a new initiative that we've just signed. Stephen Cohen, many of you know from the New York Mets, from the hedge fund. Here in the United States, the CVN, the Cohen Veterans Network, has 23 facilities across the length and breadth of America. What we're able to do is, partnering with CVN and the Ministry of Defense, there are going to be a number of centers that will be opening up in Israel. And that specifically is not what we've done until now, is the therapy for the soldiers, the discharged veteran soldiers, the therapy for those who are not discharged. Right now is happening actively in WeWorks in Tel Aviv. We'll have this beautiful facility in Netanya. What CVN and FIDF are partnering together with the Ministry of Defense is to set up for the families of those who are suffering from acute PTSD. Therapy for the families. If I'm suffering from PTSD and I'm with my therapist a couple hours a week, where am I the rest of the week? I'm with my parents. Where am I the rest of the week? I'm with my wife. Right now, what's happening is we're able to provide services to those families as well. And this is a huge initiative that we're undertaking. It's a $20 million initiative. Those who would like to participate in that, this is something that really is groundbreaking. And as well, we want to thank the Cohen Veteran Network, the CVN. We've been able to work an agreement with them that lone soldiers, whether they're American lone soldiers or whether they're Israelis who are now settled in America, who have symptoms of PTSD, will have access now. Israeli lone soldiers, former Israeli soldiers who are in America will have access to those 23 facilities. We're very, very proud to announce that. And each and every week, there are new requests coming from the Ministry of Defense. There are new requests coming from the General Staff of the Army, and we'll share them with you. But we desperately need your help. We still, of the $248 million that we've committed just to the war effort, we still have to we've raised about 183 million as of today. We still have quite a long ways to go. And that's above and beyond taking care of 27 brigades in terms of the welfare for the poor soldiers. That's above and beyond all the transformational educational initiatives. We could use your help, use your partnership, because ultimately these young men and young women, they've sacrificed not only for Israel, they've sacrificed not only for the Jewish community worldwide. They're on the forefront of Western civilization. They're on the forefront of humanity. And their sacrifice ultimately is what's providing stability and preventing Iran, the hegemonic Shia caliphate, from taking over this world, from taking over the Middle East. And what they've sacrificed, ultimately we are all the beneficiaries of. So please, please open your hearts, open your wallets, and help us provide for these soldiers. Incredible young men, young women, who have ultimately sacrificed their youth, their innocence, for all of us. Thank you. We are very grateful to your participation, very grateful to your generosity, and very grateful for the love, the care, and concern that you've provided these incredible young men and young women, the most moral army, not only on earth, the most moral and ethical army in the history of humanity. And we've seen it in Gaza, we've seen it in Judea and Samaria, we've seen it in Lebanon, and we have the incredible opportunity and blessing to support these young men and these young women. Wishing each and every one of you a wonderful week, and we'll be back in touch for next week's briefing.